How's it going, man?
Doing good. How you doing?
Doing pretty well. Can't complain. Still stuck at home, but things could be worse. So we're here to talk about roughly 1,500 feet of aid climbs in Germany Valley. In each case, Aaron and or I took part in each one of them. So we'll chat about each of those. The four climbs are going to be the Flying Dutchman, Lubyanka Dome, Perseverance Dome, and Philosopher's Dome. You'll see the year that they were finished and the height of each. Flying Dutchman was me, Pete Pencer, and Aaron. Lubyanka was Aaron and Abby Hahn. Perseverance Dome was me and Derek Brislow with a little bit of help from Aaron. And Philosophers was you and Gilly Elor, right?
That's correct.
And you can kind of see the let me see if I can get annotation going here. There we go. You can kind of see like here's Memorial Day Cave down the bottom left, and here's Hellhole. So all these climbs are in one or the other of the two caves. You'll notice that they're really close, but not quite, not quite there. Let me figure out how to get that annotation off the screen. Um, but of course, we promised 1,500 feet, and that's only 1,429. So we're gonna have to talk about Satellite Dome or the latrine climb, or what do you want to talk about? FLAD.
That sounds good. It's,
FLAD stands for Flaming Angel of Death, and that's a side passage off of Memorial Day Cave. We'll throw that one in there too. It's not technically a dome, but it's a pretty interesting area of the cave. It's good. That's the one I put on the sheet. So that gets us to 1,500 feet. A little bit of info just from Terry McClenathan. He put all this in the June issue of the NSS News. Germany Valley has 55 pits over 100 feet, 10 over 200, 5 over 3, and 1 pit over 500 feet. And you can kind of see the number of those that were climbed from the bottom. It's pretty crazy how much aid climbing has happened in Germany Valley. And even more amazing is that prior to 2000, only 7 of those 100-foot pits were known. But now there's 30 pits over 100 feet in Hellhole, 21 pits over 100 feet in Memorial Day. And there's a bunch that are still going. We'll talk a little bit about Dark Cathedral, Waterfall. Terry makes some claims about no cave kind of being able to compete in the country, being able to compete with Hellhole vertically. I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but for sure, there's been more aid climbing here than pretty much anywhere else I'm aware of. I think, even big, famous, storied vertical caves in the U.S., even Lech, I don't think people have done this much aid climbing. Going to the next slide. We got a couple old school photos here of people in Germany Valley back in '53. We got to pay homage to the people that came before us. Obviously, these are like some early hard cavers pushing stuff in Schoolhouse and Hellhole. And I think people kind of forget how much Germany Valley is connected to kind of the history of the NSS and vertical caving in the U.S. I mean, even as back as like the 39, Bill Stevenson was organizing trips out here. Also, one other thing I love is I don't know what's up with all these old NSS news articles, but they all have the NSS patch stitched on their shoulder. So I actually ordered some patches from caves.org. I'm gonna start putting those things on my cave suits as a tip of the hat to the people that came before us. This great quote was like, "Spelunking in Schoolhouse Cave has become synonymous with mountaineering underground!" 3 exclamation points. I'm not really sure why there's so many exclamation points, but obviously there's again storied history. This was obviously too back before spelunker became a dirty word. And instead it was just a term coined by somebody in NSS leadership. Obviously, prior to aid climbing, man, people would do it with these crazy scaling poles. Have you never used one of these, have you, Aaron?
no, I haven't. I've helped carry them. That's about it.
I know this cave is not in Germany Valley. This is some cave in Tennessee. Again, this is old NSS news, but great photo of the old scaling pole. They were crossing this pit. For sure, a little bit easier with the hammer drill. Prior to what we're talking about, the first kind of, so again, I mean, no 100-foot pits in Germany Valley. There was only, what did I just say, 7 of them in 2000. And then kind of in quick succession in 2004 and 2006, somebody climbed Southwest Dome and Batman. So those were kind of the first 2 big domes somebody climbed in Germany Valley. They were done by Bill Stone, Vonnie Dromes, and Vicky Siegel. I think the Batman Dome, if I remember correctly, they had a portalage that they like hauled in to belay off of, which is pretty crazy. And you said you don't think that they did a lot of bat hooking, that it's named after some other feature in the cave?
Yeah, I think it's named after the passage that leads to it.
Okay. And this is southwest, and then this is looking up from the bottom of Batman Dome. Both of those are Brian Masney photos. All right, should we do this? Should we move on to the stuff we did?
Sounds good.
Get it going. All right, so first one, Flying Dutchman. Dun, 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 dun. Send lawyers, guns, and money and get us out of this. Flying Dutchman was climbed by Pete Pencer, me, and Aaron. I think we started in 2009 and we started in 2008 and finished in 2011, I believe, or 2010. There's a great photo of Pete. He's actually 220 feet up off the ground there. One of my favorite things about Pete Pencer, who taught me vertical, is that he's afraid of heights and still does all this stuff. So, in the trip reports, I just reread them. They're great. He talks about like not looking down for like 6 straight hours. It's pretty phenomenal. Typical gear. I mean, we had those kind of awful trips where there were a couple times we had to haul 5 packs between the 3 of us. I don't know if you remember that.
Vaguely remember that.
Do you want
to the water crawls?
Yeah, I was about to say, do you want to describe the route out to the dome, or do you want me to do it?
I can try and describe that. I think there are a lot of details to it. I mean, pretty early on the trip, you go through Memorial Day Cave's most famous feature called the Puppet Buster, which isn't that bad anymore if you know what you're doing, but it's still a lot of work with a big pack. It's one of these things. It's kind of body-sized tube at the top with a little narrow slot in the bottom that your pack wants to fall into, and then rappel out of that, 120 feet straight down into a massive passage called Columbia Canyon that you travel through the rest of the way to camp, which is just a couple hours of hiking up and down breakdown mountains. And then from camp, it's another maybe 3.5, 4 hours travel out to the dome. And
3.5, 4 was like spot on with the heavy packs. That's what we were making on. We did this like weekend warrior style. So we were heading in Friday night, camping Friday night, long days Saturday, some of which we would get out. Remember getting back to camp at like 5 a.m. And Rick,
that's about our routine.
Yeah, Rick Roy, we'd like pull off the dome at like 11 p.m. midnight and have 3 or 4 hours back to camp. And by the time we got there and got in our sleeping bags, Rick Royer would be getting up to exit the cave on Sunday morning.
Yeah, and then from camp, there's some crawls. Most of it was pretty pleasant until you got kind of towards the end, and then you had a series of stream crawls. The first one was frequently dry, but sometimes really wet, but it's kind of on your belly, and then another 300 feet of kind of hands and knees in the stream, and then you pop out at what would name the GVKS room right at the base of the dome, which was our staging area.
Yeah, we found that. So that would have been January 2019. And the first time we went out, I mean, I think the first time before we started climbing, it was just me, Pete Pencer, and Scott Walquist, but we had to kind of squeeze under this duck under to the left that like you couldn't avoid getting soaked. But we later came back with feathers and wedges and blew that rock out so that there was like an easier way through. But yeah, I mean, all in all, you're talking probably 7 or 8 hours from the entrance. It's really remote for a big dome to climb. And that's with camping. That's like splitting that trip in half and going to sleep halfway through. But I think we did a total of like eight trips, maybe 8 or 9 that were actual climbing trips. And I mean, when we started, man, like looking back, I had just started caving. Like when we started climbing, I mean, I'd only been caving for a little over a year.
Mm-hmm.
You probably don't remember this, but like you taught me to place my first bolt at the bottom of the Flying Dutchman.
Oh, really? I had forgotten that.
Yeah. And that's like where I learned to aid climb, was like on the dome. I learned to aid climb. Yeah, and I also remember like emailing the listserv, the Germany Valley listserv at some point, and being like, what sort of book should I read to learn how to do aid climbing? And everybody's like, there's no books on aid climbing underground. Like, you're on your own. But the whole thing, I would describe it as a pretty significant life event for me. I mean, I think like starting at the bottom and looking up and just being like, crap, like, how are we going to do this? Like just staring into this endless pit going up, and the answer was just just start and just go 3 feet at a time. I think it makes you really resilient to challenges that have like a lot of uncertainty, and you don't know what's ahead of you. You're just like, we just got to start and keep pushing, and we did.
Yeah, and at the start, we didn't know exactly how big it was because 35 or so feet up, like the dome pinches down to like a 2 foot wide slot, so you don't really see how big it is up above. And we did get a disto height of like 155 feet, like one of the survey trips we did out there before we started climbing. So we knew it was pretty big, but didn't have any idea until we got a little higher up.
Yeah, you read those early like contemporary trip reports, and it's like contemporary trip reports, and it's like the dome may be over 150 feet. Like this may be 150 foot. Well, the same thing happened with Perseverance Dome too. But here's like a good shot. This is Todd Roberts' photo of Terry and Pete gearing up at the base in GVKS room. But from there, it was like you said, 40 feet up to that ledge, you could get off rope. So this photo's at that ledge. And then it was, I don't know, maybe another 60 or 70 feet up to you had that calcite ledge with the popcorn alcove. That like, back in the tiny alcove and get off rope. But we had the like system to clip the rope off so it didn't swing out into the pit.
That's right. And that calcite ledge is such a cool feature because looking down the dome from above, you just see this white ring down at that level.
Yeah, there's a great Brian Mazzy shot later where you can see it even from like 200 feet up. There's also a great quote in Pete from this trip out with Terry that Pete put in his trip report that says, "I was pretty beat and would have had trouble keeping up with Terry if he didn't have to fight with the snakes," in quotation, which is his venerable and unimitated rope walker system. Yes, he did the entire cave with a rope walker. But then
I guess for anyone not familiar with Germany Valley Cave, there are lots of relays, and it's not rope walker friendly.
Yeah, exactly. Then from that calcite ledge, it was some straight up climbing. You hit the rubble ledge, and then from the rubble ledge, there was like this other ledge you're seeing in the picture at 220, and there were a couple leads right there too. I remember you could stuff the third person like back into that crack behind you, and you kind of get down there, and you're pretty much off rope, and you just like hang out in this fissure when you weren't belaying or climbing for like 3 hours. Yeah,
but being in like a narrow, slimy, wet place for 3 hours wasn't nice either.
It wasn't great. And I remember this was like a crazy J-hang too, that like when you got on rope, I mean, right here, I think you were still climbing, but once we got up higher, the rope kind of came out and, you had this crazy J-hang out there. There's you climbing too. That's like, you're probably 230, 240 off the ground there. And then here's the shot from the top. So again, you can see that calcite ledge you were talking about all the way down. It's probably a little hard to pick out for somebody who doesn't know the dome, but this is, again, Brian Mazny's photo. I think I wasn't on the photo trip, but he brought out some crazy contraption to take photos of the dome, right?
It's just a regular tripod, and he anchored it into one of the bolts up top to keep it steady while I rappelled down with a flash. So, it's linked 4 pictures of me stitched together.
You can actually see in this photo like where you are, or where one of you is the last hanging belay. Like if I remember, I think we ran out of rope, like we ran out of dynamic rope and before we hit the top, and we only had like another 30 feet, but we had to set up a hanging belay there just to finish.
Mm-hmm.
That climbing would have come from the 220 ledge, and so if you ran out the rope, we didn't have a full length rope. We didn't usually haul it back there. But one thing I will say, I remember taping it and I got up, the top of it was kind of that tiny little crack. Do you remember? You could kind of get up in there and just wedge yourself into the crack.
Yeah.
It was like comfortable enough you could get off rope. You probably didn't, but I think I almost had to take my helmet off to get into the crack. But taping all the way up at the top of that crack, the sort of childlike joy of spooling out that 300 feet of tape to tape the dome is for sure something that the disto generation will never get the pleasure of. You just start feeding it out and it starts going like zzz, and you have to put your hand on it like a brake. The tape is just taking off down the down the pit. It kind of reminded me of this.
It's worth noting that sorry.
Go ahead.
To say, it is worth noting that the water in the dome comes down the left side from that last picture, and you can't really see where it comes down from. So it is possible the thing actually goes up higher than the top we climbed to.
I remember that.
Someday somebody's have to get up there.
I remember that infeeder, which never got checked. It didn't look great, but it like where the water came, it didn't. I remember when you got in the crack, it looked like you could see through into a little bit more space. There was like a tight spot you couldn't get through, but you could kind of see into passage. And then across the infeeder you're talking about, it looked like maybe it was going back up into the same space, but it looked pretty tight. It didn't look great. I don't think it would have given me any more height. Maybe. But I did also love, I found this in the April 1958 NSS News. This is some device designed by Cord H. Link, who I don't know, but in order to measure deep pits back in the day. So I guess, I don't know if you would prefer that or the 100 meter fiberglass tape, but there it is. And those leads at 220, we actually went back to check. I don't think you were on that trip. It was me, Carl Byrne, and Pete Pencer. But there's kind of leads back into that fissure. We went into it. That was almost like structural. I mean, do you remember? It almost looked like the two walls had just separated.
Yeah.
On that trip, I went back.
There's one part that's pretty hard to chimney through because the walls are just totally flat and slick and no features.
Yeah, it's not great. I remember that.
Yeah, I believe it's not even a solution passage. I think it's basically just tectonic in nature. Just the rocks, just bedrock is split apart 2 feet wide.
It's probably the weakness that the dome formed on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, on that trip back, just below the 220 ledge, I had a full core shot, almost 220 feet up off the ground. And I kind of look up and I see something on the rope and I step up and the whole sheath of the rope separated out a foot. So this photo is me 30 minutes later, once I've gotten kind of up into that lead at the 220 level, and you can sort of still see the panic in my eyes. It's like wide-eyed and terrified.
And you were the first person with that expression there, because there was previously a rebelay right behind you there, a place trying to keep the rope off of some rocks they could rub on at the bottom of the lead. And I didn't trust the bolt to begin with, so I rigged it up with minimal extension behind it, and there are quite a few bolts leading down the passage backing it up. But John Harmon was climbing up that in the main dome, and the bolt blew out, and you felt like a foot or so before the rope came tight, and similar scare.
Yeah, I remember that. But I did recover enough to take this photo, doing whatever Carl Byrne and I are doing in this photo. We checked that lead back there. So, I mean, the fissure went to a second pit. We dropped down, and then there was like a little bit of a, tight spot you could squeeze through on the left wall, and we got into that, and it ended. So those didn't end up going, but who knows? Maybe somebody will go back for that ceiling and feeder you're talking about years later. I wouldn't climb our ropes.
I'd like to go back there at some point. There was good airflow back there, and it's one of the closest points between the two caves.
It is one of the closest points. And I think I mentioned this to you. I remember feeling airflow, this pit that Carl and I are sitting in, and that's off that 220 lead. I remember feeling airflow in the floor of the passage, like kind of coming up out of the breakdown. But I didn't that could just be traveling back to the main dome. It's hard to say. So, all right, should we do part 2? Oh, wait.
Good.
One thing I don't think I've ever discussed with you. So obviously we named it the Flying Dutchman, right? Have you ever thought about that name? That it's like a crew of damned souls that can't reach hell?
Yeah.
We went out there to try to connect the hellhole, and then the cave didn't connect.
Yeah, I don't think we considered that in the naming of it, though.
We didn't. It was just pure chance. It's pretty funny. All right, part 2. Lubyanka Dome, what Aaron does in the shadows. So this was in Abbey Hahn in 2011. The reason I'm calling it what Aaron does in the shadows is I couldn't find any photos. I think we've determined that this is not Lubyanka. This is not the traverse at the top, right?
No, it does look pretty similar to it, except you were traversing underneath the mud ledge because, basically called the top was an overhang bit of rock, and then there's just mud above that, and then goes up to sort of flat ceiling, very similar to how this looks. And then from there, you did a traverse out into a passage.
But this is just free publicity for John Harmon. We're just giving John Harmon free publicity here.
Probably so, yeah. So the dome was actually discovered by Pete Pincer on my first ever trip into Memorial Day Cave.
Oh, I didn't know that, really?
He did a short climb. It's basically just a traverse out a ledge and then like a couple feet up, just out past a place called Titanic Room. It's an area of the cave where it starts to dip at about a 45-degree angle, so it kind of looks like a ship going down. And it's a little walking canyon, went about like, I don't know, 40 or 50 feet up to this big dome we looked up into. So as soon as we finished up with Flying Dutchman, you know, obviously the next idea pops in the head is, oh, this other huge dome that we discovered a few years back. And I think Pete had his fill after the Flying Dutchman and wasn't interested in helping out, but didn't have too much trouble talking Abby Hahn into helping me out.
Yeah, dome.
And I think so. Yeah, and so I don't know how many trips we did, 3 or 4 or something like that. It was a lot easier going because it's only about an hour or so from camp and MDC, and climbing is a little more straightforward.
Those Flying Dutchman trips were, I remember those being pretty arduous.
Yeah.
I remember being pretty blown out coming back after, you know, like getting off the dome at midnight, like I was saying. They wore me out for sure.
Yeah, so you want to tell the story of the traverse at the end? That's probably the more exciting part of Lubyanka Dome.
Climbing 213 feet of dome wasn't exciting? You're just going to skip over that?
Yeah.
It's 213
Well, it wasn't a whole lot of stories to tell.
Right, sure.
To think of.
Yeah, I went back to help you. I think we went back to tape it because it hadn't been taped. So we went up, and like my memory is you get up to the top, and we were just at like a hanging belay that we both kind of got up to. It was maybe 10 feet off the ceiling roughly. And that's where the 213 depth comes from. I mean, I think all these domes, with the exception of Flying Dutchman, we measure from the ledge, not from like Perseverance Dome is the same. That 526 comes from the drop off of the ledge. Like we'll call it tag style of measuring pits, not to the ceiling. But yeah, we got up to that hanging belay, and then there was kind of passage, sort of, it looked like, in both directions. And I traversed off. It was really shitty rock. Got all the way to the other side to the passage going on the left side. And there was this, it was kind of up into this like muddy slope, and there was a huge slab of breakdown that I had because it was just like a muddy mess, and I had nowhere else to put a bolt to step up. So while on traverse, I placed a bolt and I clipped the etray into it, and I didn't want to clip anything else into it because I was afraid that this giant slab was going to peel off. I mean, it was probably one of the freakier points I've ever stepped up on. I'm sure it was glued in fine. You know, we're always a little bit more scared than is probably reasonable, but that's probably for the best. And just sort of gingerly stepped up on this thing and put my foot into the kind of the trough to going back up into the lead. And it started this like kind of massive mudslide that just went on for 30 minutes. It was just mud pouring off the edge of this trough, heading down 213 feet. And I remember I could only find bolt placements in the ceiling because all the rock on the sides was scrappy. And then I think on the way down, that mudslide ended up like ejecting a rock that bounced off the wall of the dome and hit me in the face at one point too.
Yeah, I believe that mudslide was still going after we'd surveyed a couple hundred feet of passage to the top, and then started rappelling back down.
The note in the trip report said that the mudslide was going for like 30 or 40 minutes. It's crazy. A couple hundred feet of passage, but didn't end up going. And somebody else went back right and did the other side, and that didn't go either.
I'm not aware of anybody doing the other side. As far as I know, that's still a lead.
I thought that's what this photo of Harmon was, but I guess I'm wrong.
I don't think so. I'll have to ask.
All right. Well, what you do in Chato is 213 feet of aid climbing with no photos. There's like a great line in Solo Faces, which is a good novel about rock climbing if anybody's interested. But the main character is like they can know that I did it, but they don't get to know how I did it. That's you climbing Lubyanka Dome. No photos, no trip report. I'm sure there's a trip report. I just couldn't find it. All right, part 3, Perseverance Dome. Are we ready?
Sounds good.
Perseverance Dome, Fistful of Steel. So Perseverance Dome, is, I guess we're jumping now. This is the first one in Hellhole, right? Because we did Flying
Yeah.
Dutchman and Lubyanka were both in Memorial Day. Perseverance Dome's down. It's what is it to Hellhole's camp? 2.5 hours maybe from the entrance? 3?
Probably about 3 hours.
3 hours, call it. And then I think the dome, my memory is it's like 2 hours past camp.
Yeah, something like that.
But it's interesting because that means it's 5 hours and Flying Dutchman is like 7 or 8. Flying Dutchman feels significantly harder caving wise to get out there. It's a pretty nice. And these Hellhole's camp is, or Shovel, I should say Shovel Eaters Camp, Diggers Hall is a really nice camp. But anyway, that Perseverance Dome is this giant hole in the ceiling that takes off from Perseverance Hall, which was discovered by Bob Alderson, Mark Minton, and Vonnie in 2011, a couple hours from camp. And I think you did the first pitch up the dome. You climbed like a kind of section of this slightly overhung rock that was pretty shitty.
Yeah, I did that with Abby Hahn, and we just got in one pitch of climbing, and then John Harmon just came running up really excited about another dome that he found with air going up it. And so then we got sucked off into working this other dome complex for some time, which also wound up going up a couple of 100 feet and leading to a bunch of 100-foot pits.
Is that Rainforest Dome?
No, it's a Windy Heart Dome.
Windy Heart. Okay, Windy Heart's back.
Yeah.
Back. I know where Windy Heart is. But so I was wondering this when I was putting these slides together. Has anybody, like Rainforest Dome got climbed too, right?
Yeah, I think John did that.
Okay. Here's like the good picture of Perseverance Hall. I think it's a little hard to tell, but I think this is the far side of the dome, right? It's again a Brian.
I think so.
But yeah, if you're looking at this sketch, this is Derek Bristol's sketch of the dome. Hold on, go back. You can kind of see it actually intersects the dome like 60 feet off the deck. So you can see the 2 Perseverance Hall on the left. That first section of climbing you did kind of ended up just below where it says 1 PS bolt with a question mark, and there's a lead on the right-hand side of the wall. And then I think Derek and I came back and climbed. I guess actually you ended a little bit farther. There was a roof ledge where that first rebelay is on the sketch. And then Derek and I got to just below that ledge on the next trip. Here's like a good photo of, this is actually John Gross swinging out. You get to do this fun J-hang out into the dome when you first start climbing. This is like the starting point. But then from there, this is Derek kind of getting up into that first alcove, which I think is about, it's like maybe 80 feet of climbing from where you start. So at that point, you know, we out of 526 feet, you can kind of cut off 50 or 60 feet of climbing because the bottom of the dome is 50 or 60 feet down from where you intersect it. But so this is, you know, maybe 80 feet of climbing at that point, 140 feet up. This is Derek just topping out on top of that into that alcove. There's some nice actually stuff back in that alcove. And it also sort of let us climb in the fissure for I don't know, maybe 30 feet or something. We got a little bit of less exposure, less pucker factor. But when we finally peeled out back into the wall in the dome, and Derek kind of climbed out there, it ended up leaving this really high redirect that I had to let myself out on. And I thought, you know, like I could just pop the bolt and just do the pendulum thing, which I've done before, but it's a little bit freaky to do it on a wall, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think I reviewed the article, and when I wrote it in the article, it said that I left that hanger there and let myself out instead of reclaiming the piece. I was too afraid to just pop it loose and swing. So I referred to it as a monument to my better sense and the limits of my courage. So I guess we all have our lines in the sand, and that was mine. And then from there, it was like 60 or 70 feet of really good solid rock. Like we had nice, clean, solid rock. You can see this is like in the middle of that dome is just this crazy white flowstone column that was just on the wall. I mean, it's not even really a column. It's just like it looks like a column embedded in the wall, bright white on this clean gray, limestone. It was just really a fantastic feature. Here's kind of Derek leaving that alcove, heading up the rock. And right above that thing, we had to set up a hanging belay, which was a trip because at that point from the hanging belay, you couldn't see the bottom or the top of the dome. So you would kind of look down and it was just, you were looking down into darkness and you would look up and you couldn't see the top either. And we headed out with like a belay seat, I brought like one of those bright yellow rain jackets that you see like road crews wearing, because we were starting to get rained on pretty good, and you would get this like ballistic mud. We started to get back into mud, and you know, the person bolting would have to scrape a couple inches of mud off the rock just to get a placement, and you're trying not to get bombed in it from the belay seat. But it's kind of fun when you get mud at that height. It gets like a Doppler effect going. Like you can kind of hear it coming off the dome, and it goes whoosh when like cruises past you. And we pushed up from there to like a couple other ledges, and we got a stance. But I think on that trip, like I headed back down to the alcove when we were leaving, and Derek was coming down, and he knocked a huge rock loose. And you know Derek, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this video know Derek. I think it's the only time in all the time I've spent caving with him where I heard what could possibly be described as panic in his voice. I mean, he just started screaming, rock, 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 and this huge rock goes through the belay stage. But fortunately, I was kind of down lower at that point. But yeah, we hit like, started to get into this really muddy, we hit this ledge. You can kind of see it right in the middle of the dome in the center of the sketch there. And above that, we started to have issues with the drill failing. Like we would have to pop the battery out and slap it back in every time you wanted to hit a bolt, because it was just so much mud on the dome. You can kind of see this is what the gear would look like. This is where I really learned the benefit of Metolius versus Yates daisies.
Yeah.
Metolius daisies,
they don't flip so much.
But they grip way better in mud. Way, way better. But I mean, the gear was just like a mess. You can get a photo on the right, you can really get a feel for it. And it just like ate gear apart. I actually still saved this one carabiner, which, by the way, I think was yours. I think I owe you a carabiner. Just to show what galvanized corrosion looks like, and that it's real. You know, I think you get people that like, it's not going to do anything, but I would never trust that carabiner.
Got a few that look like that.
So that one, I think, you know, you started climbing, and I think that I'll go back to it real quick. That's just like 6 months in a cave.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it was covered in moisture and mud. You know, you get that kind of electrical effect. But yeah, from that stance, we drilled, we climbed another pitch, found like another tiny little 4-foot stand, like not 4 foot, tiny little stance with you could just get your toes on the spot to stand. And strangely, there was just one single 4-foot soda straw at that ledge. And from there, I remember coming up and Derek saying, you know, it's really strange. The cave is in the 50s, but my shirt is in the 40s because we're just soaked and climbing. But we got up there, we topped it out, and we surveyed down the same day. And this was, I can't remember what we just said, 2013, 2014. And I remember at the time, like surveying down with the disto, we had some speculation that people would doubt the figure because we were using a disto. Like it was, I don't think anybody would do that now, but back then, it like a dome that size had never really been surveyed with a disto.
Mm-hmm.
But you and Terry came back the next day, and it was really close agreement. I mean, we were within like a foot. I think.
I have to say that after that, I really appreciated the suffering that you guys went through climbing that, because just jugging the rope and rappelling back down, you get soaking wet. And the idea of just spending hours belaying in those kind of conditions is just horrifying.
It was pretty bad. I definitely remember being pretty soaked and pretty miserable at times. But I mean, it was in the mud. The mud got annoying. We didn't have. There was no spot where we had really, really terrible rock. Above that one ledge, there was like one tough spot. But even that, I remember getting through and being like, I remember climbing through and being like, okay, that was doable. But yeah, it was 526 to the ledge, it's 533 to the ceiling. So like, you know, you guys did the one that was 526. It was probably 6 feet when I stood to the ceiling. I almost touched it. So like the tolerance was probably well under a foot. But I think the whole thing, there's 8 rebelays and J-hang, 3 J-hangs down to the bottom. So it's a little bit of a vertical jungle gym. Here's the two of us in camp. This is probably on the way out. We look pretty clean. But we got a little swagger, right? I feel like we're looking good there. And then a couple shots of the trip in. I always just love this shot of Joy Canyon. This is on the way in from the entrance to camp. You know, and you end up getting to camp here, which is, I would say, one of the nicest cave camps I've been in.
Yeah, I love the trip to Hellhole, partly just because, you know, you go through the connection crawl and starts out kind of slimy, stoop walking, and the cave just gets nicer and nicer as you go. and from Joy Canyon up into the big upper dry borehole.
You get to throw the aqua socks on for Joy Canyon.
Yeah.
Which, you know, you can kind of see, if I go back here, you can actually sort of see in the shot of Derek, how high the water in Joy Canyon gets in that photo, right?
Yeah. It used to be deeper than that, but we found some ways around the deeper pools. It used to be the Yodel pool.
You say the Yodel pool?
Yeah, you can guess why I got that name.
Yeah, sure. This, you probably can't read in the image, but this is just a fuel canister in camp that said calories to borehole conversion juice. A good way to revert a fuel canister. Okay, so what are we up to? Part 3 now? Philosopher's Dome.
That's all right. Or 4, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, Philosopher's Dome.
So Philosopher's Dome was you and Gilly, and I know John Harmon and Corey Hackley went out with you guys too, but mostly you and Gilly.
Yeah. So it was first discovered by Gilly, John, Corey, and I think Adam Bird maybe. They actually did an 11-day-long camp trip in Hellhole, and
I remember that. Like just for shits and giggles, basically, right?
Yeah, and Corey did like a 40-foot climb up a little small dome that he found was taking some air that everyone had just been walking right by for years. It was like right on the trek out to Perseverance Dome. And then, you know, Gilly got excited about it and didn't have too much trouble talking me into climbing it when he told me how big it is, describing the thing as being like 100 feet in diameter at the base. Like, well, that's pretty interesting.
I remember rooting against you guys because you guys found it, and like, you know, we topped out Perseverance Dome, and there was a lot of speculation that Philosopher's, just because it was so much bigger at the base, would be a bigger dome. So that's not to be you know, a bad supportive caver, but I do remember part of me being like, oh man, I hope they don't pass Perseverance.
Yeah, we were gunning for it, but it just didn't keep going that far.
I think there's big domes left out there, man. There's gonna be, I wouldn't be surprised if something passes Perseverance.
Yeah, well, we just found the huge TARDIS domes a few years back, and
we got that at the end.
Pretty comparable too.
We got
yeah, we'll get to that later.
Yeah, we got
So anyways, you know, Gilly was really a big driving force behind the Philosopher's Dome climb, and John as well here.
Yeah, I got these photos. I mean, if I didn't know John Harmon and I saw these photos, I would think this person was crazy. Like, I would be terrified to run this person in a cave. I know John Harmon well, so I've also included this slide, which shows that he is a respectable, productive member of the caving community. But these photos don't do John Harmon any justice.
Yeah. Well, let's be careful that we're respectable.
Are we supposed to be respectable? Don't be respectable? John's not respectable, is what we're saying. Okay. Yeah, I got a couple shots from Gilly here of Philosopher's Dome. How many trips? Do you remember how many trips it was?
I don't remember. I'm guessing maybe 4 or 5, something like that. Most of the climbing was like really pleasant, straightforward. You know, it's a little bit muddy, but you know, pretty dry. Nice thing about being such a huge dome, like it could have like a big waterfall, as you can kind of see a bit of in that picture. But
yeah, I got
we were way far away from that when we were climbing. And I think that picture on the left is Corey Hackley at the top of the first day's climbing, maybe like 90 feet up or so, shining a light up.
I do like these photos are great. They're a little grainy, but they do a really good job of showing the scale of it. You know, like if you look at that,
it's definitely.
You look at the person, you really get a feel for how big the space is.
Yeah, it's definitely a big airy space, and I think there are times when like Gilly and I were climbing this route up to the top of it, and John Harmon and Corey were climbing on the other side to get into a big hole in the wall that led to a lead. And I'm not sure if that area's even finished yet. I think that was maybe like 100 feet up the other side behind the waterfall. But it's pretty smooth going for us until we got to the very top, and you can see there's a ledge on the other side, and I did one traverse pitch over to that, and I guess the last like maybe 15 feet or so of rock in the dome is just totally terrible. And I had a 5-inch bolt blow out on me at one point, and I'm kind of scared, taking a fall at the top of a 400-foot dome, and somehow it knocked my headlamp out. So that made for some excitement. And then once I picked back up, crawling up onto the ledge turned out to be kind of scary, partly because I dislodged this, big, I don't know, 2.5, 3 foot diameter slab, and was just kind of like holding it because I know that Terry was somewhere down at the bottom. I was hoping he was staying clear, and I was yelling rock for several minutes. Being such a big space, there's no way to really communicate. But I knew I had to let it go at some point because it was just too big for me to try to move it somewhere safe, and you couldn't hold it forever. And then after that, turned to be quite a fiasco getting a rope rig to get us down. My drill bit had broken, and so the holes I was drilling were too small for the bolts, and had to hammer away at them for a long time, and the ends of the bolts just kind of mushroomed over. So the first couple of bolts I drilled were not something I really wanted to trust and use myself as a body anchor, while Gilly came up with another bit and some more hardware. And it's pretty hard to find good rock up there. The only place to drill was really in the ceiling, and I was a little worried about that because there are all these like slabs on the ledge up there that just peeled off the ceiling. The rock's good, made a nice ping, but just scary.
Yeah, I remember when you, Gilly, and I went out to Satellite Dome, which is just past that, you both were kind of like, we're not going back up there. Like, forget that.
Well, I did go back up there then to try and re-rig it, and made a mess out of the rope, and basically just had to fight to get back down because I'd de-rigged all the rebelays going up. And so, and made a mess out of the rope I was going to re-rig it with. And so I had to pass like all these knots in a muddy rope going back down, which was a bit of a challenge. Being that it was, 400 feet of wet, muddy rope hanging below me.
Yeah, it's a big dome. It's a really big space. I mean, when you're at the bottom of it, maybe even, I don't know what the diameter is, but it feels like you're saying more airy than Perseverance Dome for sure. Mm-hmm. Obviously Flying Dutchman was pretty small at the bottom. We didn't have that feeling at all, but
no,
it's probably easier. It probably makes it more fun to climb when you got that big, little spooky. Mm-hmm. But all right, should we move on to the next section, or you got anything else on? Let me see if I missed any of my comments. I think we're good. Should we move on?
I think I'm ready to move on. Yeah.
Nothing else about Philosophers? So FLAD, you want to describe FLAD as a passage? This is we're going back to Memorial Day. So Perseverance and Philosophers are both in Hellhole.
Sure. Yeah, and so the story is specific to the FLAD pass. Well, a particular part of the FLAD passage, and mostly like around a dome pit we named FLAD the Inhaler. But FLAD Passage first started getting explored pretty early on in the exploration of MDC. Pete Pincer did about a 40-foot bolt climb up into it out of Columbia Canyon, sort of the main big borer hole in the first part of Memorial Day Cave. And then it kind of sat for quite a few years, and eventually Scott Walquist and Rick Warrior were cleaning up leads and did another maybe 25, 30-foot bolt climb, which led to a really nice extension they called Flat Hollow, big like 80-foot diameter passage. And they did a couple of trips out that and ran into what they described as a big mud wall. And then they recruited me in to help out with climbing that. And because they described it as mud, we prepared some mud pitons, basically just like foot-long pieces of angled iron take out there. And then we got to it, discovered it was basically just all rock with a little bit of dirt, mostly just big kind of near vertical pile of breakdown. And so I just sort of tried out while I was there and climbed up a little bit and didn't really run back down the moves. I just climbed up and just sort of like kept repeating that process till I got to a point where I was just below the lip and found myself in a situation where I didn't feel comfortable pulling the moves over top of like this one last boulder. And didn't really have any protection to use because we didn't bring a drill with us, expecting to see mud. Fortunately, Scott Walquist was willing to make this trip all the way back down to Columbia Canyon to grab a drill and then bring it back up to me, which I think it's probably normally would take somebody over an hour to make, but Scott probably did it in half that time. And so I was able to top that out. And then we came to this point in the picture here where hit a pit where I think we rappelled down like 90 feet or so. And that pit is what we named FLAD the Inhaler, and you should just refer to that whole area as FLAD the Inhaler now. And one of the really interesting and unique parts of this part of the passage is there's this old flowstone there. Most of it's eroded away. And, here you climb up a little bit onto this big bridge that goes out over top of that other pit.
Yeah, I mean, I remember like having gone over it. It's hard to get a feel for it just looking at these pictures, but you kind of get up on that flowstone bridge, and like the rope is actually bolted into the ground because that's the only place to put any sort of backup. And you're walking for quite a bit on that flowstone bridge. I mean, like my memory.
Yeah, it's maybe 100 feet or so.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, you've been over it a lot more than I have, but. And then
then out the very end of it, like a hole opens up on the left-hand side and narrows down to about 6 feet wide and extends across to the far wall. And then you get to this point here where started rigging down.
Yeah, and you can kind of see it. There's sort of in the top center of the image, there's a ledge. That's what this kind of rope is aiming for. And you can see this is the same shot from the other direction. It's this huge J-hang to get over to that ledge. I remember the first time going through it. I was kind of on that rope and I'm kind of halfway down and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, how did somebody get here the first time? I remember asking you and you sort of just like calmly said, well, yeah, I just tied the rope to my hammer and swung it around and threw it like a grappling hook, across this whole distance back to that ledge in the background and pulled yourself, 30 or 40 feet. I mean, what do you think that gap is? 30 feet?
Yeah, I think it's probably at least 30.
I don't know. I remember at the time doing all this GVKS stuff. I mean, now obviously I'm out west, but Mark Minton always used to talk about lending us his grappling hook. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I borrowed it from him one time in Shovel Leader Cave, and fortunately the thing I was throwing it at was pretty hard to hit with a grappling hook, but it eventually worked for us. It's not something I would normally carry with me. It weighed like 8 pounds or something, probably.
Sure.
8 or 10 pounds.
I always remember him telling us that the thing you have to be careful about is when you throw the grappling hook up onto something vertical, when you climb up it and get to the ledge, the angle of pull on the hook changes. So right at the most dangerous point, you're changing the angle of pull. I remember we were all thought that was crazy, but I got to be honest, I actually own a grappling hook now.
Oh, the other thing is if it doesn't grab, it's going to come back down at you.
I mean, at that point, though, if you're at the top, that's probably the least of your worries.
Yeah, I'm saying even like before it catches something, when you're just throwing it up from below, before you even try and climb a rope.
I don't use mine to throw stuff up. I just use it mostly for cliff entrances. To get into cliff entrances, you'll throw it into the cliff entrance and then pull yourself in.
Yeah, it's a lot more reasonable.
Yeah, you're not putting your life on it. But yeah, you get to that ledge, and I think we did like up the ramparts was maybe a 70-foot climb or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then down there's another pit that you and I dropped down. I think all we had left at that point was the belay rope, the dynamic rope. So John Harmon, you and I dropped down that. And that was as far as I got, but you guys later pushed it. You got to a little lead that was across that pit, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually I think the rampart was like 120 or something.
Oh, was it that big?
Feet up. Yeah.
Bigger than I remember.
But
I do remember.
We were in big booming passage, and then you hit that wall, and it looks like it ends, but we're just hoping it's going to keep going over top, and fortunately it did. This is just past the General Jugger pit. We pop into a place we called FLAD Shugia just because of all these beautiful flowstone there, which it's pretty rare in Germany Valley. There's a lot of like really pretty crystal features in Germany Valley, not much in the way of flowstones like this. But the cave kept going. I think there's maybe 2 miles of survey passage out beyond those climbs.
It's quite a bit. There's 2 miles past there.
Yeah.
Huh. It's a lot. All right, before we wrap this up, do you want to talk about the stuff that hasn't been climbed yet?
Sure.
So
we'll start with Dark Cathedral then.
I think the only one I really have queued up for photos is Dark Cathedral. We can talk about Waterfall too.
Okay.
Or I mean, these features I don't know, so it's on you. Whatever you want to chat about.
Yeah. So a few years back, someone was crawling around in a lead. I first checked just right outside of camp in Hellhole, like just after we discovered that passage, and somehow failed to look on this obvious hole in the wall, but that led to a 170-foot dome, which led to another 60-foot dome. That led into this big upper-level passage called the TARDIS passage, and that led to two big domes. I think this is Chris Coates here doing a traverse around the Dark Cathedral, which was fit about 160 feet deep, and they distoed the dome, I think, at another 200 some up from there. And
are they going to crack 300, do you think, or?
Yeah, so since then, I've done 2 trips climbing there with Mickey Fox and Terry McClanathan assisting, and they made about 170 or so feet of progress up, and then it goes down about another 160 feet. So I think it's about 330 now, and it seemed like you could see it another 80 or 100 feet from there. So I think it's probably going to be a little over 400 feet.
Oh, damn. And it's right above this right here, or like it's kind of right above Chris in that photo?
Oh, yeah, it's right above him. I think the climb starts, back behind him, another 100 or so feet back. And it's also huge in proportions, pretty similar to Philosopher's Dome.
So they might finally get a 400-footer.
I think so.
They're missing that. I mean, we got a 500 and we got a couple threes, but no fours. I think this was labeled. Is this also Dark Cathedral or no?
I'm not sure. It may be. Yeah, it probably is just below where Chris was there.
And Waterfall is a parallel dome complex?
Yeah, it's just another couple hundred feet out the passage. Just traverse that line that Chris was on, and that leads out continuation of passage that led to Waterfall Dome. And it's a pretty similar case there where the pit that went down 100 some feet and they just stood up 200 some feet. So I think they confirmed it somewhere in like the 350 range at least.
It's a big one. So there's more to
and
come.
Nobody started that yet.
Like there's other, I mean, I feel like there's still other domes that I know of that haven't been climbed too. So I guess the point is we got to keep the survey line going up. We got to more plus 90 shots. This is the data from Perseverance Stone. You'll notice there's a 142-foot shot at plus 89.5, followed by, or I'm sorry, 125-foot shot at plus 89.5. Followed by a 49-foot shot at plus 86.8. So just all these like really high angle shots for 370 feet of survey out of 526. But I think that's about all I got for photos, unless you got something to add.
Nope, I don't have anything else.
If anybody has any questions, they can email us through the email addresses in there.